All the second stage tanks now pressurized. Astronauts report it feels good. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with bite.
Hello and welcome to Through Early Morning Fog I See. Some people will recognize that lyric and some people won't. Probably more Gen Xers than anything, but the thumbnail should have given you a clue. I'm your host, Hannah Wallen, here with Nonsense Annihilator Lauren Brooks, the personification of perceptivity, Mike Stevenson, and Richard the Lionhearted, and the Doge in charge, Brian Martinez, working in the background to make everything happen. Now you guys, since I ran you all over, can say hi.
Howdy.
Hi. It is quite foggy down here.
There's this weird tint in the air because the sun's quite red, but it's full of clouds, so it looks like a film being set in Mexico. But there's this weird piss-colored tint everywhere.
It's the Canadian fires. That's what it is.
Canada's on fire.
Yeah.
Hannah,
a lot of it.
Yeah, go
ahead. F's to the audience to pay respect for Canada. So, yeah, it's like we get them here too, the wildfires. Not here as in where I'm sitting, because I'm in Ohio. We don't really... Something catches fire in Ohio and it spreads like that, that would be really bad for a lot of people. But the western states where there's huge tracts of land, and also, like countryside and stuff. Huge tracts of land that doesn't wear bikini. That is just not a person in sight for miles and miles and miles. And lots of trees and camping and shit. That's where that happens. But and I imagine that's probably the same thing in Canada. There's probably a great deal of this occurring in areas where there are not people living, more than anything else. But of course, recent history has shown that if the oligarchs want a piece of land, lightning will strike there, or some other weird shit will happen, and there will be fire where it's not normal. So cross your fingers and knock on the nearest piece of wood to make sure that it doesn't happen to you. And, like I said, F's to pay respects for Canada. But to explain the reference, and I really should have written something down because... I'm a little brain fried today. I got up at a little earlier than normal this morning, and normal is 5 a.m. So I've been getting up at 4 a.m. And you would think a night shifter wouldn't have a problem with that, but since I've been a day shifter now for 4 months, it is. But since I had 2 weeks to think between the last show on this topic and this show, it got me thinking about the problem that I have with this bill. And it's the problem that I have with all of these bills and laws going into effect that are like this. It's medical suicide itself is not the thing that I object to personally. Okay with the fact that if we have to use painkillers and things to spare somebody from choking to death or experiencing the choking to death, for instance, that comes at the end of ALS, and they want to choose that, then that's one thing, right? But a lot of these laws make it too easy for someone who isn't the person having the health condition to convince the person who is having the health condition to go down that path when they might not have chosen that for themselves, or to override their choice to not go down that path. especially someone who's easily influenced, can't self-advocate, or is no longer all there. And those categories cannot. It's not just dementia. It can include people that have developed mental health conditions and are getting worse, or just aren't getting better. And some of the people that are the hardest to protect are people who can't always explain what's going on with them, like people with PTSD. And of course, that got me thinking about how many soldiers actually we lose every year because they cannot deal with what's happened to them, either in their military experiences or in their family after their military experiences have completely changed their lives or completely changed them. And or they married a disloyal whore that decided to fuck around on them and leave, which happens way too frequently. And so that is why I chose the first line of this particular song, which Gen Xers will recognize as the first line of the theme song from MASH, for the movie and the TV show. You get to hear it actually in the movie, but in any case, so people understand why, even though this is about health conditions in general, you see the military tints. I don't think, in the movie, one of the characters, and god damn, I can't remember his name now. Damn it. Like, I haven't watched that movie 1,000 times. But one of the characters wants to kill himself. And like the rest of them obviously don't want him to do that. And so they give him a drug and he thinks he's dead. And he thinks he's dying, and then he thinks he's dead. And after he goes through the whole ritual of committing suicide, because he really thinks he's committing suicide. He thinks the pill is going to kill him. And they do the whole funeral for him and everything before, so that he gets to see what he wanted to see, which was people mourning him. The next day, he's in bright spirits. And I think a lot of times, if people had that second chance, they would never try again. And women often get that chance, and men very often don't. And one of the biggest differences is that when a woman expresses pain and suffering and distress and lack of purpose, lack of willingness to live or willingness to die, people care and they try to talk her out of it. Right? They don't just shut her up either. They don't, oh, you can't, don't talk about that. Don't talk about that. Right? They tell her that they would be distressed if she was gone. And it is very distressing, even if somebody that you grew up with, cared about through your whole childhood, and then had to move away from and didn't see for 5 or 6 years, and you find out that person's gone. And she didn't even call you, right? He didn't even ask for help. That hurts a lot. Like, I can't even begin to. I usually am really good at explaining how things look and feel, and I don't think I can explain this other than the fact that there's grief over losing someone, and then there's also grief over not even getting a chance to help, not even getting a chance to try to talk them out of it or give them what they needed to take a different path. So when you run into a situation where somebody might be difficult for the people around them to deal with, especially in a medical facility, and medical personnel might talk that person into killing themselves when you're not there. And believe me, I've seen medical personnel, I've seen the consequences of medical personnel making unethical decisions and bullying someone into accepting it when they don't have an advocate present. It happens, and it's not rare. It should be, but it's not rare. It's a terrifying prospect. You could lose soldiers with PTSD. You could lose men and women with depression. You could lose people who suffer from a perception disorder like schizophrenia, where it's very hard to go through life not being able to trust what you see and hear, and not being able to trust what you know to be true, because you can't always be sure if you're right. And it doesn't take a big push to drive somebody in that circumstance to suicide. So I lost a friend in university because his parents didn't think he needed medicine for that. It was against their religion, and so they took his pills away from him, and he hanged himself. And I lost an elementary school friend because medical personnel decided that her pain wasn't that bad, and they took her medication away, and she killed herself. So when I talk about this, it's personal. But
yeah, I think the question that is begging here is, why isn't there better health care? And, we know the reason, right? If you have a socialist system for your health care where you have to wait 6 months just to see a doctor, and by then your cancer may be incurable, and now you're presenting a program to assist you with the change of life. No, what is failing, and why is nobody pointing that out?
Yeah. It's exactly what I'm afraid of. Right? You end up with rationing. You end up with rationing of healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
You end up with, it would be cheaper to let this person kill themselves than it would be to try to treat them for the condition that they have.
Mm-hmm.
And I've watched, in my country, I've watched insurance companies do that, right? Lauren and I have probably both seen this with family members that we love. First, the therapy that would help is too expensive, but you can have all these pain pills, as many as you need to treat this pain and keep you from asking more about, the physical therapy and the massage therapy and any other potential options that might slow down the progression of this degenerative health condition. And then after you're over 60 and your body has degenerated because of the degenerative health condition, then you can count on the fact that they're going to take away your, now you're a fall risk. This medication that we've told you to take for 30 years, you can't have it anymore. But we don't have an alternative. You're just going to have to learn now that it's 10 times worse. You're going to have to learn to live with the pain that we haven't let you progressively experience over the years as it got worse. So 30 years ago, when you couldn't deal with that pain, that's nothing. Let's do this now to you. That's why my mom decided to have surgery in 2020. And she got COVID at the hospital and she died because of healthcare rationing. We're not going to cover what you need. We'll cover what we have to do in order to keep you from accessing that until it's too late. And then we're going to take that away too. That's healthcare rationing. And it's happening now when people are paying insurance companies to pay for their healthcare. When we don't have medically assisted suicide in the US. So when these laws come into effect, there's a thing that really needs to happen, right? They're not talking about it in this article at all. It has to be cut and dried. You cannot suggest this to the individual. The individual has to come to you and ask about it. And you cannot provide this after denying care for a treatable condition. Period. It can't be allowed ever that a patient can be denied care for a treatable condition and then killed. Because if they can do it, they will. There isn't a question about that. It will happen. So, before we go on with this, it's probably too late for a trigger warning. We don't really do trigger warnings here, but I'm gonna probably get dark talking about this. I've already gotten dark talking about this, and I imagine that there are people that are listening that also want to get dark talking about this. YouTube's not going to let you do it, but you can send us through our Superchat channel, feedthebadger.com/justthetip. And I'll go over the rest of that, the spiel momentarily, but I want to make sure I'm not advocating for or against medical suicide here. I'm advocating that it can't be done lightly. It can't be done carelessly. And it absolutely cannot be done in a way that allows people to be killed instead of getting health care. Those are my stipulations. It has to be handled so that it's a last resort.
I have to wonder why there haven't been more stories of people successfully faking their own death. You'd think with the wealth of wealthy people out there who despite their billions are going to die. A lot of these folks have a philosophical aversion to death, and you would think a lot of them would try to perpetuate their life by faking their death, but I'm struggling to think of anyone who's successfully done it. Lord Lucan, maybe. There was a story about this British lord who went missing one day, and he was just eventually presumed died. And I guess this has happened a lot of times, but you just don't hear about them. You don't hear about many of the successful cases of someone faking their own death because it was successful. Because if you successfully fake your own death, then it's just recorded as a death. So how many times has that happened? And I know this is like the opposite subject to people actually taking their own lives. But I'm sort of sat here wondering, to what degree are we even told the truth about when people do indeed suicide, or when they didn't but they pretended they did, or when they did but they pretended they didn't? I don't know how to get this across, but yeah, no. What we think we know about how many people are dying is probably not accurate, especially when it comes to people who took their own life in extraordinary circumstances, and people who had their lives taken in extraordinary circumstances. And, you know, the taking of a life generally is an extraordinary circumstance. This is a random black pill I'm throwing into the situation. Maybe everything is wrong. Maybe no one knows anything, and we're all fucked. Sorry.
You know, one thing in the modern era, it's very difficult to just fake your own death with a disappearance, because if there's no body, they're going to assume you're still alive and just missing, and they'll keep looking for you, especially if they have a reason why they want you. Before I get into the spiel, we got two Rumble rants from Roboto1234567. One's for $1, and the second one is for $2. And the first one looks like it starts in the middle of a sentence because there's no capital, and it says better health, comma. So I don't know if I'm missing part of it or not, but it says 1,800 dentist, healthcare in the USA West is very much not a given, although is very expensive, and most doctors are only trained to treat, not to cure. It is all a bad nightmare a lot. And it is that way. And in fact, a significant portion of the problem with American healthcare is drug companies aim for continual treatment rather than any type of cure. So it's very difficult, especially with like psychiatric treatment and stuff like that. They really don't want you to get better. They want to maintain a state of being almost but not quite okay. Just enough that you can function and maybe get a job and pay taxes, but not so much that you don't feel like you need them anymore. If you don't have to go back to therapy, that's really bad for your therapist, because now they've lost a customer, right? So then they have to find somebody else. They don't have to take on a new patient. So obviously, Western practitioners, you really have to find somebody who is obsessively ethical in order to get good therapy of any kind. It's not just that they're not feminist. They also have to not act in their own self-interest financially. And sometimes, you can find things like, I don't know, people to help you with, say, an anger management problem or smoking or something like that, where it's expected that you're going to get better, and there's going to be more people that need their help, so it doesn't take money away from them if you get better. It just gives them better advertising. That works out pretty well. But let's say you've got something like depression. Okay, you can never just not be depressed anymore. Because if you're ever just not depressed anymore, or anxious, anxiety is another one, or you can't learn to function without therapy, without having to contact your practitioner and go in and talk and check up on your meds. And, they have to see you every 4 months, or they won't keep prescribing if you need meds for life. Because those are practices that need a consistent consumer feed. And it's very difficult to deal with that. It makes it's very problematic to have something that maybe is treatable, like your depression is situational, not chemical. Or it's an attitude, not a mental state, which does happen. I did that. I had a depressed attitude, not a depressed mental state, which, essentially I was emotionally lazy, which, I guess that's part of the tism. I'm getting that explained to me by a few people in my life right now, but it still required, a little bit of treatment. And the first thing they did was try to make it a permanent condition that I had to go back to them for forever. I didn't need them forever, but that's not profitable. And they do that to men. And if they create a situation like that where you never get better and you never quite get to the point where you don't need them, you can function, you feel like you're going through life spinning your wheels the whole time, that's deadly for a guy in a lot of circumstances. Like a woman can do that. A woman can fail over and over again, and people don't judge her. They're like, well, she's got this problem, right? She's got depression. Right? A man has that same situation, and everybody's like, get the fuck over it. What's wrong with you? Should be better by now. You've been going to a doctor for how many years? Pick your ass up and come out with us, right? Nobody comes along and says, hey, can I do anything for you? Do you need some help? Are you okay today? It's always impatience. And we can't afford for you to be not be okay right now. We need you to get this shit done. That doesn't work. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm afraid this law is going to impact more men than women. I'm afraid that this law is going to impact men more negatively. And I'm afraid it's going to cost male lives in ways that it won't affect women most of the time, because it's a lot more inconvenient to society if a man isn't entirely functional, or at least it's recognized how inconvenient it is, right? People will go well out of their way, pay all kinds of taxes and support all kinds of initiatives to essentially put a woman on economic life support, and not think of it as an inconvenience, but it's an inconvenience to knock on a neighbor's door and make sure he's okay. Mr. Roboto gave us the second one is $2. Said, make it legal to fake your death in the USA, but you cannot do it for money or to defraud the insurance company. Apologizes on the fall of England in FIFA. So I don't know what the last bit was. FIFA, is that soccer?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
That's why I don't know. I pay zero attention to soccer. It's just I thought that's where I heard that term before. Not a big soccer fan. But all right, since we are at a pause here before we get into the article, we got to do what we got to do. As always, Honey Badger Radio dishes out a smorgasbord of thought-provoking discussions. You guys thought you were going to get away without a commercial, huh? And as experiences both recent and long past have demonstrated, the provoked thoughts are fighting back. They've made it clear that for people like us, relying on third-party payment platforms like Patreon to fund our work is treading on thin ice, or building our house in the path of a rapidly growing wildfire. In light of this, we strongly encourage our supporters to switch at least their support for us to feedthebadger.com, the most stable way to help us out. And like I said before, if you want to tip us directly instead of relying on any social media platforms tip jar that might censor you, the link for that is feedthebadger.com/justatip. As long as you don't say anything that's going to get our whole channel taken down, I won't censor you either. But be nice. Don't get our whole channel taken down. As always, the same risk applies to our social media platforms, which is why you should further provoke the thought police by tracking our thought-provoking discussions on honeybadgerbrigade.com, where you can find your way to all of our content, as well as a link to feedthebadger.com in the drop-down menu at the top of the page. And it really is still a danger, even on X, right? Back when it was Twitter, I used to get in trouble all the time. I got put in Twitter jail a lot for stupid little things, and it was in funny ways too. If they couldn't report me for hate, they would report me as a bot, and then I would have to do this stupid thing to prove that I was human. And I usually failed it 2 or 3 times before I was able to actually pass, because apparently I'm like a computer enough that I fail at the more complicated types of CAPTCHA tests, but or Turing tests or whatever. Turing tests, I mean. But in any case, we also got, it looks like, a couple of super chows. Dark Kikimura gave us $20 and said, I saw a feminist argue. Dark Kikimura, has your name always been that short? Because I always read a third key and I don't see it now. I saw a feminist argue that men are unlikely to find dominant women who don't support feminism because the most because most femdoms she knew of viewed femdom as an important part of having equal socioeconomic power to men. I had to explain to her that getting with women who openly admit they are into it for real power in the real world sounds like a terrible idea, and that's exactly how you'd find a real abuser. Yeah, I only know one person who has been a femdom, and I think she would probably beat my ass if I called her a feminist. But people believe what they believe.
If it is who I think it is, I think you're absolutely right.
It's it okay, so maybe I know two people who used to be femdoms, because I don't think you've met her, and I don't want to out the person that I'm thinking of.
Okay.
So
all right, we'll keep it there.
We'll keep it there. Okay, that sounds good. We don't need to be outing anybody's past.
No.
But I know somebody that used to be a femdom for money. I'll put it that way. But in any case, we also have Meredith G gave us $5 and said HBR Talk 408, honey for the Badgers. And then we got another one. Richard Pierre just gave us $5 and said a factor to consider is how many healthcare professionals are practicing cookie cutter medicine. And when a patient presents in a manner that doesn't neatly fit into one of the cookie cutter shapes, the the chick that got diagnosed with autism and Ehlers-Danlos syndrome at 52 last year, so 52. The solution is to, on a good day, find the closest shape to what is presented. On other days, it is the most recommended shape, whether or not it remotely resembles the perceived shape, and then make it fit with the bigger hammer. I suspect that the bullying by caregivers is trying to force patients into one of the standardized shapes that they feel most comfortable in treating. So one of the examples I have for you, my grandmother had very, very strict views on end of life and what she wanted and what she did not want. And one of the things that she said is that if she needed a feeding tube, that meant she was ready to die, and we were not to ever do a feeding tube for her. That unless they were certain that it would lead to her survival and recovery. Well, she was in her late 70s and having many, many strokes from the type of Ehlers-Danlos that I have. And it was basically like Alzheimer's fast forward. So what you would normally see, 10 to 15 years happen in 10 to 15 years time happen to a person with Alzheimer's disease. We saw with my grandmother in about 18 months. And she ended up in the hospital because of an illness. And, she might have recovered from the illness if she wasn't already in bad enough health. She really was not wanting to eat. She was ready to pass away. And she kind of decided she was just done. And so they started recommending, we want to put her on a ventilator, we want to put her on a feeding tube, we want to put her on a glucose drip and all this other stuff. And my mom said, she has a living will. Here is what it says. Here is what you may do. Here is what you may not do. And she was very clear. Right? And so we started, there's the vigil with grandma, that we were staying in the hospital with her and everything. And everybody had different times where they had to be out to go to work, to get food, things like that, and come back. And this doctor found like just a 20-minute window where grandpa was the only person in the room with grandma. And my grandpa, he had, one of those hearts that it looks on the outside, right? Like it's as protected as galvanized steel. It looks on the outside like you couldn't shoot through it. Bulletproof heart, right? But it only looks that way until somebody is having a rough time, or he thinks that he might be responsible for somebody else's pain. And then you discover that my grandfather's heart is softer than talcum powder, almost like pudding, right? And then I say he's been gone for years, but you had to protect Grandpa from being taken advantage of, because he just wanted to be there for people and help people. He wanted people to be comfortable around him, and he wanted people to be happy. And there were a lot of flaws that you could point out, but that wasn't one of them. And huge heart. So this doctor comes in and starts telling him that Grandma's going to die in pain because she's not getting food in her belly, that it's going to be a horrible death and it's all his fault. He's starving her to death. He's killing her. And he just kept at him until he gets Grandpa to sign the paper. And if one of us had gotten back like 2 minutes earlier, they were literally walking out of the room with the paper, signed paper by Grandpa, when we came back in. And I've always kind of suspected that we were watched and sort of pressured out of that room to make space for that. And instead of listening to the rest of the family, they went ahead and they wheeled her out. They put a feeding tube in. They wheeled her back in. Same bed and everything. Did the procedure very quickly. And when Grandma woke up from anesthetic, she pulled it out. We lost her in about 2 hours. That is how little they care. It doesn't occur to them that it's people that they're dealing with. That procedure, is doctor recommended. So you got the ego factor, and then they can bill for that procedure. So you got the money factor, right? And then also they worry that if they don't nag you into a procedure, that later on you're going to sue them for not doing it. So they're covering their ass. But they didn't give a rat's ass about what my grandmother thought. Right? That was one. That was one that was... I'm still, when I talk about that, like I'm ready to punch something right now. And that's one of many, and it makes it that much worse. My grandmother was one of the most ethical, loving, and caring healthcare practitioners during her career. I wish I could tell you everything about her. She and my grandfather and their kids, all three of them, did something absolutely remarkable during their lifetime. But I'm afraid that if I out who she was and what she did, that the facility that still exists in her name would get harassed by people who hate us, because we've had so many other forms of harassment. And when I say harassment, I don't mean people on the internet saying nasty things to us. We've had bomb threats. We've had people send videos of people being beheaded to some of the men in the men's rights movement, and say, this should happen to you. It's incredibly gross We've had actual physical threats, and then we've had the types of threatoids that feminists complain about. And so I really can't tell you. I shouldn't tell you. But yeah, Roboto 1234567 gave us $1. Said, "Is not that when you place grands on hospice care? We were making arrangements." And so at that point we knew she was dying. We were making arrangements, and we were staying with her in the hospital, and then that happened. I also got a bit of a reminder from Richard Bier in our chat about the nurse. So I'm an intactivist, right? A lot of people already know that. And of course I have a son. So obviously the reason that I'm an intactivist is because I did my research when I was pregnant, and then had some very serious conversations with my family, my husband, my parents. Didn't have grandma around anymore to ask questions, but the more that I looked into it, and the more that we talked about it, the more that we decided it was a dumb idea to take that choice away from him when he was an infant, when he could just as safely make it later in life when he was old enough to consent to it. There wasn't a valid reason to do that. So we didn't, right? But when I was in the hospital after delivery, and I was in a state of, I was drugged. We'll just leave it at that. They gave me a painkiller because they had cut me open. So I had he holed up in the rib cage when he found out the political environment in the world, and they had to go in after him with a knife. He's like, "I ain't coming out, no." But she comes in, this nurse comes in, right? She's like, "We're gonna go do the circumcision." I'm like, I'm not consenting to a circumcision. We're not doing that. No. And so she goes, "Okay, well, we need you to sign a refusal form or it'll be done." Which was bullshit. They need a consent form signed to get any medical procedure like that done. But she brought it in, and I figured I'd sign a refusal form if I had to, because I was going to protect my son from having any unnecessary opening created in the biggest organ in his immune system, the skin, especially inside a diaper that was going to end up soiled regularly because he was an infant, and infants are incontinent. So she comes in with this paper, and there were two parts to this paper. It had a consent and a refusal section. They were separate sections. There was a line between them. Each part had a place where you sign. She points on the consent part. Here's where you sign. Hands me the clipboard, and then I read it because I didn't trust her, because I learned the hard way that you cannot just trust medical professionals, with my grandmother. Sure enough, she was trying to trick me into consenting for the circumcision. She was directing me to sign. She was so mad. I signed the correct spot where it said I refused, and she grabbed that thing, and when she left the room, I don't know if you ever heard somebody in high heels walk along a floor that's like those great big wide tiles on top of cement, and it's like clack 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 clack. And she gets out in the hallway, and she's like, "It didn't work." So I know it was on purpose.
No.
Yeah. It didn't work. You damn right it didn't work, bitch.
Wow.
Yeah. And no, he was not 11 pounds. Who was it that said that? Let me see here.
That
I have to go back. He was not 11 pounds. He was 9 pounds. He was a big boy, but he wasn't that big.
That's insane. That's insane. Number one, that you thought you could just say that and nobody was going to hear it.
Oh yeah.
Like what? Like the hubris.
Yep.
Holy shit.
So this is, if you understand, y'all understand, when I'm worried about this, I'm not worried about it because, I'm a weirdo conspiracy theorist, right? I'm worried about it because over and over and over again, I have watched medical personnel be unethical. I worked at a nursing home in the 90s, in the early 90s, that I ended up having to report to the state because they were breaking the law with regard to how many personnel they had on the floor, and the percentages that they were supposed to have. You had to have a ratio of no more than 14 patients to one nurse's aide. And that's pushing it, by the way, especially if, most of them are mobility challenged and several of them need assistance. Some things can happen to you in your old age where you can't even feed yourself. And so you need somebody who can take time and be compassionate and careful feeding you. But if you have 4 people to feed in 30 minutes and you're going to get in trouble if you don't do it, it's very difficult to maintain a compassionate, caring pace and attitude, right? Same thing with getting 14 people dressed who can't help you. And they doubled it. We had one nurse's aide to 28 people repeatedly. Right? I told them where they could get help with that, where they could get temp workers who were state tested nurses' aides that could come in and at least, help be the second person on the floor, even if they had to team up with another person and it was 2 people had 28 patients for that day instead of one person. It still would have been better than just one. And I actually got written up for bringing that up. And I went up the chain of command like we were supposed to. And each time I was, called on the carpet for bringing that up. And they weren't going to fix it. And I wasn't allowed to talk about it anymore. So I finally went to the state. And the state ombudsman for the elderly, by the way, when you talk to them on the phone, if you give them information like that, they will be they'll sound very nice and very polite and deceptively calm. But when she walked into that nursing home, the voice of God came out of that woman. Who put that over there? Why is that woman sitting alone? What is going on over here with this man? He doesn't even have, do you have a license for that restraint? And she was like right on down the line. Not a license, but there's a medical order you have to get if you're going to put somebody in restraints. You can't just do it because they're difficult. And that was happening at that nursing home as well. They fired everybody from the head nurse on up. They put people in jail. They the state took over the nursing home and then ran it for 6 months while the company restructured and came back and revamped the entire process. And the next time that I was in there, which was years later, to visit somebody else that my family knew, it was significantly better. It was actually really good. But again, it was about money. It was about not having to do certain level of work. And they didn't really care about the people that were the most important people in the system, the patients. So it's very difficult in healthcare to deal with that. And there is a lot of unethical behavior. And so
this is why I've run out of patience when it comes to arguing with people about circumcision. Because people get really set in their ways about things that are just considered traditional just because they're considered traditional. And I'm okay with that when it comes to things like weddings and funerals. But when it comes to things like mutilating the sexual body parts of humans, like, you keep encountering these people who can't, like, they can't argue logically because of the sunken cost fallacy. Like, if it turns out what they've been doing is wrong all this time, then it turns out what they've been doing is genetically mutilating humans for no good reason. And it's, you can't get through to people who are sunk into that particular sunken cost fallacy. And you can see why. And this is why I've just run out of energy when it comes to arguing with these people, because they're not arguing from any logical or intellectual or emotional standpoint. They're just, well, we've always been doing this, so we have to keep doing this. And we're like, but what about the enormous amount of pain, the enormous amount of unnecessary, completely unnecessary pain that we're dealing to 8-day-old babies coming up? And of course they can't come to terms with what they've done. How could they ever? That's what we mean by the sunken cost fallacy.
Yep.
Like, once you're this deep into it, like, either you've been doing the right thing or you've been doing the very worst thing. Like, the conceptually, even possibly worst thing you could possibly do to human beings. Like, genitally torturing them at 8 days old. So of course they can't come back from the sunken cost fallacy. They're just gonna keep, and it's always difficult arguing with someone who's determined to be a fucking ass about it. It's determined to be an oxen or an ass about it. Just no, this isn't wrong. This can never be wrong. No, Kevin Bacon did not appear in Footloose. I'm just doing the fucking Family Guy sketch thing. But it applies so much more to these people who have been just genitally torturing babies for so long that, like, why would they ever come to terms with what they've done? It's impossible. Because if you ever come to terms with what you've done, then what you've done is the worst thing that can ever be done. You're genitally torturing babies. Like, how? Like, why? And you just have to keep inventing this bullshit forever to stop you from coming to terms with the fact that you've done the worst thing ever. Yes, worst thing ever. There were Aztecs who were lopping off people's heads on the top of the pyramid. But, to be honest, lopping off people's foreskins when they're 8 days old is even worse. Isn't it? That is even worse, isn't it?
It creates a lifetime of problems, some of which the individual will rationalize, but they still exist, even if you rationalize them. Yeah. So, torturing someone is a fate worse than death, and it gets visited upon infant boys within the first few hours of life when they have no concept of time because they haven't experienced it yet. But yeah, and this is the only procedure that is advocated for that involves such a dramatic procedure: the amputation of flesh, the removal of skin, which, like I said, that's the biggest organ in your body is your skin. It is an organ. It is the biggest organ in your immune system, and it is your primary barrier against any bacteria that just lands on you, or bacteria that comes out of your body and needs to be gotten rid of. And if you don't have that barrier, the underlying tissue can get infected. And this is one of the biggest things for me about, like, the first thing that made me just squeamish, just a little squeamish about, I was on the no side to begin with, basically. It was the idea that, all right, the skin is there to prevent these bacteria from getting to the underlying tissue that can get infected. And some of the worst bacteria is in feces, which is going to end up in the diaper because the kid is going to poop in the diaper like he's supposed to. That's, what happens when they're babies. It's predictable. You know for a fact that feces is going to get on that wound. And you don't know for a fact that any bandaging you have is going to fully protect it, especially if it's also wet, right? Why on earth would you do that? Why would you create that risk? It seems like the stupidest idea to ever be created by humankind. That we should just routinely do this to children. And before anybody's like, oh no, this was God's idea. No. Not what we do today. That was not. And furthermore, if I remember correctly, it also wasn't done in infancy during the period of incontinence after childbirth. It was done at like the age of 13. Big difference. 13-year-olds can control their bowel movements. But yeah, you can't just put some kind of over-the-counter, like somebody's mentioning Neosporin. Yeah, I wouldn't trust Neosporin to be the barrier there. I would want something much more perfect for that job, like skin, which is why we didn't cut anything off. But yeah, people make all these medical arguments. Nothing that dramatic is done in any other type of medical condition for such a tiny little gain as well. We think that maybe based on this research in which we screwed up our data by using condoms, we think that maybe at least part of the benefit came from circumcision. It's tiny little benefit. Oh, and there's also a minuscule reduction in the chances of penile cancer that also is dwarfed by the benefits of condom use and also being picky with who you fuck around with. Pardon my French, but STIs are much more easy to avoid if you just don't engage in hookup culture. Maybe save it for marriage, or like not that I like the government being involved, but a committed relationship, preferably a lifetime one. And it's easy for a Gen Xer to say that. Like we ended up in the tail end of the baby boomer and their baby boomer sexual revolution and all that bullshit, right? So there's a lot of Gen Xers with regrets. Not regrets as in like, gosh, I hate this person now. I wish I hadn't done anything, but gosh, I sure did take a lot of unnecessary risks. That was dumb. Thank goodness I didn't lose the gamble, but a shitload of other people did, because you have if you look at the number of diagnoses out there, and if there was actually only one per person, about half the population would be infected with STIs right now. Roboto 1234567 gave us $1 and said circumcision is debatable. Female circumcision always a no in the West. It used to be. now that we're importing other cultures to replace American voters, there's at least one judge in Michigan that decided that laws against female circumcision are unconstitutional. Women voted for that. That was real smart one, ladies. You stuck your foot in it. We're trying to go the other direction. We're trying to get things not done to any babies, not increase the number and scope of babies that get this done to them. So, with it fully established that the medical community, the medical profession, and as ethical as many people can be, it definitely includes some very scarily unethical people here. And remember, we've been looking at this article up to this point. The only argument we have seen is this is needed sometimes, right? And questioning how we're going to do it is a vote for the status quo. Mr. Noobed gave us $2 and said, just sending some cash. Thank you, Mr. Noobed. So here's where we were. Last week we read, I think, this part, and I'm going to read it again and then continue. Through the debate, proponents of the bill sought to argue that MPs could not allow the status quo to persist. Kind of the status quo where we don't kill people. The Labor MP David Burton Sampson said his Christian beliefs had meant he was initially against assisted dying, but the exertions from constituents who described their loved ones dying in excruciating pain had persuaded him to support it. In my view, the bill has more controls than it had. The debate has been ongoing for many years. It has gone through hours of scrutiny. I believe in choice, and while I believe assisted dying is not for me, it should be the choice of others, or for others, he said. Many speaking in support of the bill told some of the hardest moments of their lives, such as the Conservative MP Mark Garnier, maybe that's Garnier, I don't know, who spoke of his mother's drawn-out death from pancreatic cancer. That's another terrible one. Pancreatic cancer, liver cancer, those both are torturous ways to die. There's a lot of ways to die that really suck, especially certain health conditions. He said she had endured more suffering and anguish compared with a constituent with the same disease who ended their life under assisted dying laws in Spain. Labor's is that Siobhan? Is that how that's pronounced? It's Siobhain. I think it's Irish. I don't know, Mike, are you here? You're not muted, are you?
I think he sounded like.
Hey, wait, what did you want? What?
All right, you might not be any better at this, but it's spelled Siobhain, and it looks like it's Irish because it's got
Siobhan.
Siobhan, okay.
It's just Siobhan.
Siobhan McDonough's voice broke with emotion, describing her sister's death from brain cancer, and her fears her life would have been shortened had such a law existed sooner. From both Labor and the Conservatives, there were warnings that the bill would herald a watershed moment that could not be undone. The mother of the House, Labor MP Diane Abbott, said MPs could oppose or should oppose the bill on behalf of the marginalized. I came to this house to be a voice for the voiceless. Who could be more voiceless than someone who is in their sickbed and believes they are dying? I ask members in this debate to speak up for the voiceless one more time, Abbott said. This is a difficult one, right? There are people who have been given terminal diagnoses that they survived. And, it's not always like me where I I just happened to be born in between where asthma was widely untreatable or not very treatable, and when it became a lot more treatable, and they recognized that just because it was exercise induced didn't mean you couldn't exercise, right? I'm talking more like people who have gotten to a stage of cancer where they said, you have no chance of survival. We're not going to do chemo and radiation or radical surgery or anything. We're going to call in hospice. And then the person went off and tried something else and had a turnaround. It's rare, but it happens. My 8th grade homeroom teacher's husband was one of those cases where, now they did do chemo and radiation, but they told him that he was probably going to die anyway. This was a last resort. The chances of him getting through it. And similarly, I had a friend that was given a 25% chance to survive, not with cancer, but a surgery that she had to have. And if she didn't have it, she was definitely going to die. And the only reason they did it was because she was young. So, and she survived, went on and continued to live for years and years before she had any more serious health conditions from that particular diagnosis. So a terminal diagnosis doesn't necessarily, like, they can't, they're not getting information from the Grim Reaper himself coming along and saying, okay, here's when I'm going to show up, so you can tell them. They're whistling in the dark to a degree. Like, this is what usually happens, so this is what we're going to tell the patient. We can tell them the rare good side of it and the rare bad side of it, but this is what usually happens, so this is what we're going to tell the patient. And, the rare good side of it has the good ending. So if they have a situation where somebody's wanting to commit suicide because they're afraid they're going to experience the bad end of it, the law should protect and by ensuring that you at least get to a point where that you're not getting the good end of it, even if it means you have to go through some portion of that suffering. Because if you have a chance to get better, you should at least try. So I always say, never accept an expiration date from a physician. They could be wrong. 2 MPs, the conservative MP, Tom, this looks like Tug-in Hat. Is that can't be right. And laborers, why the fuck are you guys doing this to me? Laborers Chi Onra they said they were deeply concerned about the fundamental shift in the role of the state, giving it the power to end life. I know other people's names are not an attack on me. I went to school with a teacher whose last name was Chaplinsky. I shouldn't have this kind of problem, but that's the difference between Polish and Irish, I guess. Labor MP Vicky Foxcroft, who resigned a whip on Thursday night. I don't even know what that means. Okay, Mike, are you there?
Oh no, he's outside smoking.
Maybe that's a typo and it was resigned as whip on Thursday night in protest.
No. The whip refers to somebody in the party as the lead whip.
So it's like in the U.S. where you're the majority whip or the minority whip.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
So it probably is a typo. Resigned as whip.
Yeah.
That makes sense. On Thursday night, thank you, Richard. In protest at the government's disability cut, spoke against the bill, citing her fears for disabled people, as many campaigners protested outside Parliament. This is a big one.
The cuts, because the cuts going to affect me as well.
And they're cutting, if I understand correctly, and I haven't actually read anything that wasn't somebody else's comments on this, so I could be wrong. But if I understand correctly, they're cutting a little of everything.
Yeah, they're cutting PIP. They're cutting the disability elements to universal credit. They're cutting wheelchair support. They're cutting the disability services as well. And they still want to bring in the euthanasia bill.
Yeah. And see, this is the thing I'm afraid of, right? Because there's not a pause button on disability. You don't become less disabled because the government decides they want to take austerity measures. And I am all for austerity when it comes to people whose life choices have made them dependent on government, right? Like where, you decide you're going to become intertwined with some dipshit that you're not going to raise children with, but you're also not going to use enough birth control to prevent conception. And then instead of putting your baby up for adoption in a time when there are many people who want children who cannot have children of their own, you decide you're going to raise the child, but obviously not with that guy. So you're going to do it yourself. And by the way, you're not really going to work that much. You're going to live in the US, it would be called Section 8. I think in the UK, it's called council housing.
Yeah. So, because they want me to go into council housing at some point as well.
Which is a change because you're in a group setting right now, right?
Yeah, I'm in a group setting right now, but they want me to go into independent living at some point. So,
and they'll push people into independent living who are maybe not fully capable of it.
Yeah, but with the current cuts and everything that's been happening, so with PIP is out of. So with PIP, people could claim PIP can work, or they can't, or they don't work. So PIP is a in-work benefit. So you can claim PIP and still work up to 16 hours a week. So with PIP, they pay your carers or any equipment that you need for your disability.
And then you are still able to earn a very part-time income.
Yeah, living. Yeah.
Yeah. Most part-time workers that I know about work like minimum 24 hours a week.
But you have to report every income you have to the DWP.
It's similar to SSI. It's supplemental security income. It's like Social Security, but for people who aren't eligible for Social Security. And so if you become disabled in between the day that you turn 18 and the day that you have finished working the number of quarters of work that you have to have under your belt to qualify for full Social Security, they do something called supplemental security, and it's a fraction of what you would get for Social Security. And you are supposed to be allowed to have to do some work and receive that.
And also the attacks on disabled people have gone up by 10% over the past year or so because of the British press.
And that's the media demonizing disabled people as the reason why the country has to do these austerity measures. And people then physically attacking disabled people on the street.
Well, the statistics is 1.2 billion goes unclaimed each year. And the disability bill isn't that expensive as the government says it is. And they keep saying pension isn't part of the benefits system, which it is, and that's the one that's costing the most money.
Yep, that makes sense too, especially right now because the biggest generation alive has been drawing that for a while.
And also the pensioners don't really like the disabled people that much because they think we're a drain on the system.
That happens here in the US too, because they shoved disability and retirement both into the Social Security system. But the Social Security system for retirement wasn't supposed to be a thing that most people relied on. It was supposed to be a supplement that if you rely on it, it's because something went wrong, not this is your retirement.
Yeah, the British state pension is £234 a week. That's the British state pension across the board.
I'm not quite even sure how much that is in dollars, because I don't know the transfer rate, but
the pound is very bad at the minute.
Yeah, well, the last time I was in the UK, it was worth almost twice as much as a dollar. But I don't know if that's still the case. But I do know this. It's difficult now for an elderly couple with any level of age-related disabilities to live on, like, they don't do weekly, they do monthly, right? And like 2,400 would be like 600 a week. 2,400 a month would actually be difficult. It'd be, so if you were young and healthy, you probably could do it fairly well. But it was expected. It was expected that Americans would save for retirement and not draw Social Security unless they needed it. And then it became quickly treated as everybody has a right to collect this and should. And as soon as you hit 65, you start collecting it. And so, because everybody pays into it, right? And same thing with the Medicare system, which is a state-run retirement insurance system. So if you don't have some other type of insurance, and because Medicare exists, a lot of insurance companies pretty much expect you to stop being insured by regular insurance when you hit 65, or they just won't cover you. You have to depend on the state-run service, and it rations care as well. So
so my mom's care home is £1,000 a week. That the care home that she's in now, and then once they found out that she had collateral, they're kind of like draining her account now.
And they will do that too. And this is something that happens in the U.S. as well. And in fact, there's a thing that happens here where there have been elderly people in the United States that have been pushed into nursing homes by their local governments, where they'll do wellness checks that nobody asked for, and then just determine during the wellness check that these people can't take care of themselves, even if they've been taking care of themselves just fine. And the next thing you know, they're in the state-run nursing home, and the nursing home has forced them, the system has forced them to sell off their house, and they've assigned somebody to handle it. So they've sold off their house for them and their property, and it seems to only happen to people who own property. It doesn't seem to be happening. They're not going into apartment complexes and doing this.
Yeah, no, I've seen that. There's a documentary that they put out on Netflix about this very thing, about how there are insurance companies, and it might not be insurance companies, don't hold me to that, but anyway, there are people who are scamming these older people, getting into their older age, and having them deemed medically unfit to, sustain
Care for
themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. And stealing their houses, right, and all of their properties. And it's just disgusting, the elder abuse that happens here because, people are greedy. And
and it's, again, the idea that the medical profession is ethical, very, very questionable. They should be all ethical. Everybody in the medical profession should be entirely ethical, and it should be one of the most strictly watched professions. It's on par with, or possibly even higher than, law enforcement in threat potential, even without this bill, right? But this, like she says, the vast majority of disabled people and their organizations oppose it. That's a big clue right there. If the vast majority of disabled people and their organizations are opposing a right to die law, there's a lot of disabilities that lead to very painful or uncomfortable deaths. And what happened to my mom as she got older, degenerative disc disease is horrible. My elementary school friend who killed herself in adulthood killed herself because her degenerative disc disease was just destroying her, and the pain was unbearable, and there was no treatment for it, and she couldn't get the help that she needed, and she was in pain all the time, and so she killed herself, right? My mom was a close second there, in that she chose to go into a hospital right in the heat of the COVID crisis. Mom was 5'5" when I was a little kid. She was never tall. She was just average, right? A little above average, but just average. I'm sorry, a little below average. But she she was 4'11" when she went into the hospital. She couldn't stand up straight. She bent to the left at her waist, and her spine was shaped like that, and it had just slowly gotten that way. So she made this decision because she had so many pinched nerves from so many collapsed discs and bone spurs from an accident that had happened, 30 years earlier, that 40 years actually earlier, that she just could not stand it. She couldn't live with it anymore. And I didn't know this. My brother told me later. She said, if I die, I die. I can't live with this, so I have to have this done. Maybe it'll relieve the pain if they fix the problems in my spine. And that was, the last conversation that they had in person. And so this is, if disabled people are looking at this and going, this could be very bad, that's a bad sign, and especially if their organizations are that way. Richard Beer said there was another super chat, so I'm looking. And it is there. Gave us $5 and said, one really serious problem with the cookie cutter approach to medicine is when the patient doesn't neatly fit into a standardized shape. Somehow some staff act as if the patient is intentionally being difficult and is being a problem patient just to make things more difficult for the staff as a way to oppress them. I think I told you guys the story of what happened when Mom was in the hospital and they had a med error with her, and they gave her a medicine that set off her restless leg syndrome. And restless leg syndrome's weird. It feels like almost like there's electricity going through your legs. It's not quite the same, but you get this tension, and I can only describe it as a tension in your nerves. It starts in your lower back and goes down through your legs, and you have to move. And sometimes it's so bad that moving isn't voluntary. It just happens. And it got so bad for my mom that she'd be trying to sleep, and all of a sudden she would can kick. I mean, like knee inches from her nose can kick. And this was at 73 years old. She's pretty flexible for a 73-year-old, but she had a joint mobility disorder. Ehlers-Danlos causes connective tissue damage and weakness, so you don't. It's weird. And because of the accident that we were in, she was in a car accident where she was impacted at over 50 miles an hour, for sure. And she was hit so hard she was thrown out of her seat into the next seat over. Bone spurs are scar tissue, and her bones just kept re-scarring over and over again. And they can happen from other causes. Any kind of impact, any kind of trauma to your bones, soft tissue damage that causes your bones to get out of place, and then suddenly something doesn't seem right to your tissue and it grows a spur. And it can be excruciatingly painful. All it has to do is touch a nerve that isn't used to being touched by anything but soft tissue, and now there's a little bit of bone sticking into it, which is what they call a pinched nerve. Sometimes it's pinched between two bones, and sometimes it just has to have impact from something, and it feels like there's hot steel being shoved down through your leg. It's excruciating. So Senior Sticks says President Trump claimed bone spurs. If he has that problem, it's amazing that he's on his feet. Anybody that's had sciatic nerve pain knows what I'm talking about. But Thomas Cook says a vast majority of restless leg syndrome is due to magnesium and calcium imbalance, and that's true. But when they can't fix it with that, and it's in somebody with degenerative disc disease, it is often caused by pinched nerves. I have it because of pinched nerves.
I have that because of hypothyroidism.
Yep, that causes that imbalance. And that's where he says, especially, does it hit you like when you're trying to get to sleep, like right at that moment where you're starting? That's what happens to me.
So my body gets all tingly, and I will pass out from time to time, and I will have not seizures, but I will get all shaky.
It can look like a seizure. Yeah. It definitely looks weird when it happens, because you're like moving and it just looks like you're just throwing your limbs around for no reason.
Yeah, that's because they thought I had epilepsy when I was a kid, but it was just the hypothyroidism.
Yep. And there are a lot of people that they have a difficult time sometimes diagnosing it because of that. It's just like if you get somebody that does a lot of stimming, like constant stimming in the MRDD population, and they're also on a psych med, they might get misdiagnosed with tardive dyskinesia. But when you watch the behavior, if it's under their control, but they're doing it in times of high stress, that's kind of a clue that that's not dyskinesia, that's stimming, especially if it's particularly stimming type behaviors.
The doctors messed up because they removed my spleen because they thought it would stop something, but it didn't. So they removed it. They removed my spleen when they didn't really need to.
An unnecessary procedure.
And I still resent my mom because of it.
That's the difficult thing. A lot of parents, especially boomer age parents, really trusted doctors and weren't expecting to be told something was absolutely necessary unless it was proved to be absolutely necessary. It's one of the reasons why circumcision ended up so common in the U.S. because they made this big deal about how necessary and important it was.
Because the removal of my spleen, because I got autoimmune disease, that kind of ramped it up a little bit.
Made it worse, yeah. I can see how that would happen, yeah. Gee, Pete. And this is a common thing too. I wish it wasn't, but when they get somebody that has a combination of health problems, you know, like my mom or like me, and it's hard for him to diagnose, like Richard, you know, any of those where it's not just one thing, and because it's not just one thing, the spectrum of symptoms is a little too broad and they have difficulty fitting you into a particular category. They take this throw everything at the wall and see what sticks approach. And it's not good when they do that with drugs and surgery. If they do that with, let's try these exercises, let's try changing your diet, and if it doesn't fix it, then you go back to what you were eating, you know, things like that. Those are things that are life changes that can be temporary. Like, they can even be beneficial. But a lot of times they will go straight for drugs and surgery when they shouldn't.
Because over the years, I've had some experimental drugs that kind of mucked me up. I was on steroids for the longest time. So the longest time I was on steroids was like for 3 years. And that messed me up a lot because I was on steroids during when I was like from 12 to 14.
Don't get me started on steroids. We'll be here all night. That's one that they're really bad about.
Yeah, and then they put me on some other medication as well. And with the war in Iran, my medication is running low because of the route that my medication takes over there because of the supply chain.
Yeah, and that's happening to a lot of people in the UK as well. Like it's happening to disabled people. It's happening, I know, to diabetics because I've heard from other people. There's an insulin shortage. Like it's really bad, and of course the medical system there is not helping. Right, so there's plenty of good reasons why they want more caution with regard to this bill. The official reverse traditionalism channel on YouTube gave us $3 and said, "Have you seen the Do No Harm report website by Intact America, where you can report a forced retraction or circumcision accident?" No, I did not see that. I have seen some other important information on the Do No Harm It's donoharm.com. I believe it. No, it's .org. It's .org. I'm going to double check and make sure. Now, I think I have that in my Intactivist links on breakingtheglasses.blogspot.com. Which, if you go there, you look on if you're on a regular computer, you look on the right-hand side of the page, you'll find all of my pages with special things that are not just blog posts. Let me double check and make sure it's not a .com, because there's no Circ and there's Do No Harm, and one of them is a .org if I remember right. At least one of them is. Huh. And my browser won't let me go and check because it's apparently not secure. So I will have to... Like, it won't even show me the option of going anyway. That's really bad. I think it's just hiding the website. And they said that mothers in America are asked, or even just report doctors asking parents if they want surgery. They claim mothers in America are asked if they want a circumcision an average of 8 times. That doesn't surprise me. They really do the hard sell. Here's why, okay? Well, it's just a little diversion into the circumcision thing because it's kind of inevitable, right? In the United States, if a circumcision is done on your baby, that foreskin does not just go in the trash. There are people that have spread the rumor, the false rumor, that when they cut that foreskin off of your baby, that it just is disposed of. And they try to even claim that it's medically disposed of, but it's not, all right? It is sold. And there are people that are like, oh, well, it's not all medical facilities. Prove it. Prove there are medical facilities that don't do this. Show me receipts, because there is a whole industry around selling neonatal foreskin fibroblasts. Okay, neonatal foreskin fibroblasts are tiny sections of skin cells, and there are a broad variety of uses for those skin cells in not just medicine, although it is used in medicine, but also the beauty industry, right? They are highly profitable. A very tiny little section of a piece of skin the size of a credit card that can be cut into dozens of tiny little sections, right? Sells for a few $100. And that's the first sale. That's just getting it to the place where they're going to use it. It is used to grow tissue. It is used to to heal burns. It is used. Those are the 2 at least halfway decent uses, right, that I know of. But it is also it's used to regrow hair, right? Cure baldness. And it's put in a lot of makeup and a lot of women's skin products. So a lot of women out there, if they've got any product that says, some fancy ingredient, I don't want to necessarily say collagen, but collagen would come from that if it's not from a plant source. So you have to if you're buying skin lotion, look for it to say collagen from plant sources, because otherwise you don't know if you're getting horse bones or neonatal foreskin fibroblasts. And it's really bad. But there's actual facial treatments that women get done that they advertise foreskin is in this.
Sorry, I just had to
yeah.
Just as soon as I knew I was unmuted. Yeah, human tissue is being harvested for completely unnecessary beauty products and stuff like that.
For the vanity of a bunch of dick faces.
I just had to express that in a language that transcends all of the statistics we're trying to work around. Like, at the end of the day, you know what I mean? Like, human flesh is being harvested for completely unnecessary aesthetic, narcissistic, women's excesses. And
from infants, no less. This isn't people that are volunteering to give, to donate. It's from infants.
It's really difficult for me to argue with people about this, because the people who are entrenched in this argument, they can't ever. It's something to do with the sunken cost fallacy. We're so deep into this right now that we are harvesting human body parts, and if we don't keep doing it, then we'll have to admit that what we're doing is the worst thing any humans have ever done. Like harvesting newborn baby body parts for the sake of making women's skin more soft.
We have to do it, Mike. These bitches be ugly. We got to do it.
I can't imagine anything more horrific, but that is what is happening.
Because
future historians, best of luck to you. How are you going to explain to the people of the future why this happened or how this happened?
I guess that
they're busy trying to explain. They're busy trying to explain what the Aztecs did when they lopped people's heads off and rolled them down the fucking pyramid.
Or other ancient forms of cannibalism.
How are future historians going to explain how many baby penises we mutilated in the pursuit of what was it again? Women like the look of it. Because women like the look of certain things, and so they have to do things to male humans that even the Aztecs would have gone, hey, wait, stop for a moment. That's mental. Like, we're all about chopping people's heads off and rolling down the pyramid. But chopping children's dicks off and then doing and then rubbing them on your face, that's like 1,000 times worse, isn't it? Even what you're doing, like 1,000 times worse than anything that's ever happened. Isn't that what you're doing?
Yeah. Considering the fact that the reason that the Aztecs did what they did was because they believed that a god would destroy everyone in their population if they didn't do it. So for them, it was life or death, even though it wasn't really. They thought it was. Right? That's at least it's a terrible cult-like belief, but you could at least attribute it to a psychosis, right? Whereas circumcision, it's just excess. It's just excesses, and it's insane. We got Mr. Noob gave us $5. We got a super chat from him. And he says it's weird how much of our behavior fits completely textbook demonic / satanic behavior. All right, so I would go so far as to say that harvesting infant flesh for skin treatments to keep women looking younger than they actually are is cannibalism. Every woman that uses these treatments is a cannibal. If you put stuff on your face to make yourself look younger, and the source of the thing that you're using is a circumcised little boy, you are a cannibal. Every feminist listening to this, that's the case. You are a cannibal if you do this. Every woman listening to this,
it's worse than a cannibal.
You are a cannibal if you do this.
People cannibalize to stay alive. People cut up boys' foreskins to exfoliate their face. That's like way worse than whatever you have to do to stay alive. Like mutilating babies so as to make your face look
It's more like those ancient
better.
backward cultures where cannibalism was, if I eat my enemy's brain, I will become as smart as he was. Which I don't know why people did that, because you beat him, so you must have been smarter than him to begin with. But, you know, I don't understand stuff like that. In any case, yeah, that's the way I feel about it. But so back to the article.
Did you get the
made here? What'd you say?
The article that I gave you a couple of days ago about people with learning disabilities live until they're 60.
Let me look, because I have a whole bunch of messages that I haven't checked. The last few days have been nuts. I did, yes. Only over half of adults with learning disabilities do not live past 65.
Because that got me worried last week. So.
You got to remember something about newspaper headlines, right? And this is, I'm gonna hedge this with it. Obviously, not all, but let's say there's a certain type of automobile that has a harness instead of a seatbelt. And 15% of automobiles have that. They have a harness instead of a seatbelt. And then you say there's another 2% of automobiles on the road that were created before seatbelts, and they actually lack seatbelts. So you got the 15% and the 2%. Let's say somebody wants to report on that and they want people to panic about that 2%. What they will say is 17% of all vehicles on the road today don't have seatbelts. And then when you get deep into the article, you find out that 15 out of that 17% is actually seatbelts with harnesses, and only 2% don't have any form of protection. Yeah, you know. So where I'm going with this is a lot of people with intellectual disabilities, like there's a huge, vast spectrum of intellectual disabilities. And there are disabilities that happen due to birth injuries where somebody lacked oxygen when they were born and a whole bunch of things went wrong. Or there can be a gene. Yep. There can be a gene where something went wrong because this gene didn't express the way that it's supposed to, or it's extra, or it's an inherited mutation that causes problems. There are people who don't live for the first 3 days of their lives. They're born and then they're gone because of disabilities that they're born with that are known to cause intellectual disabilities, but the other disabilities that they cause, heart disabilities and other organ disabilities, result in organ failure when they're like 3 days old. And so they take this average, right? Oh, this many people don't live to be 65. Well, of course, if you're going to die in the first 3 days, you don't live to be 65. So it doesn't necessarily mean that every person with an intellectual disability has a 50% chance of not making it to 65. What it means is that there's intellectual disabilities occur enough in people with disabilities, you know, genetic differences and birth injuries that can cause organ failure and other fatal conditions that don't make it to 65 because of those. That it's that common. It's like it's not. It all depends on what your diagnosis is and what disabilities it causes. About I would say about 80% of the people that I have worked with that have intellectual disabilities also have at least one physical disability, but 20% of them don't. have a physical disability of any kind. So like it's very different depending on what's going on with you. And that can be true in families too. Like there were generations of my dad's side of the family that lived to be in their 90s, and some of them over 100. And then there was the baby boomer generation and their parents, and they all died young. And I think a lot of it was changes in the way they were treated. So, like, I keep saying this to people: don't just accept expiration dates from the medical profession, and that would include the medical journalism profession. But in this instance, this headline, if I go back and look at it again, I don't think it's not in a medical journal. It's something else. All right, I just looked at that message, damn it. I have way too many of these. BBC. Yeah, this is from the BBC. So the chances that it is sensationalism, and that if you look in the article, like buried in the article, it'll explain something that indicates that it's more on the physical disabilities side, and it's very specific to things that affect, like your heart, your lungs, your stuff like that, and in very specific ways. And they're also counting in births of infants that aren't going to survive. Like there's a condition called it's not micro. It might be microencephalopathy. You're born without most of your brain in this condition. And usually the baby doesn't live a full day, right? That's an intellectual disability, so it will be counted in the statistics. And so if that didn't happen to you, you're already on the good side of the statistics, So I never trust a source like that with something. You have to read the whole article and then go to the source that they're drawing their facts from. Each thing that they reference, and you read those. And if they are referencing things, you have to go to what they're referencing and you read those, because if you don't do all that, you come away with an impression that's probably not true. Let's see. To finish this up, Starmer, a strong supporter of the law change, has made his decision to vote at third reading some time ago, but number 10 declined to disclose it in advance on the Prime Minister's insistence, conscious that making a firm commitment to do so might be too leading when the government was neutral. Now, obviously, he's not going to vote on it now, right?
I was going to say, I thought he quit.
Yeah, well, like I said,
he's still an MP.
Oh,
he's just a Prime Minister.
Oh, so he'll still vote on it. Okay. Before the final vote on the bill, MPs passed several new amendments, including 2 from opponents of the bill. That's good. One would bar those who refuse food and water from being classified as having a terminal. So people on a hunger strike, people can't refuse food and water and then say, well, I want to commit suicide. Though MPs concerned about anorexia said it may not prevent that slipping through the gap. The other would commission a health secretary. Great, the government's going to oversee this. That's to report on the state of palliative care. Palliative care, again, is if you're dying and they know you're dying. In the U.S., they would call it hospice. There's probably an organization similar to that in the U.K. that was mentioned the last time.
We do have hospice care in the UK as well. So
okay, that's good. Because their job isn't to kill people. Their job is to make you as comfortable as they possibly can. And usually, unlike other practitioners now, they're able to do things like giving pain medicine and taking care of any causes of discomfort that can be alleviated, right? So for me, when I look at this, I'm not going to say that I don't think people should be able to make their own choices, because I do. I think people should be able to make their own choices. I don't think any medical practitioner should be forced to participate. But I think that medical suicide should be limited very strictly to cases that are similar to, like with ALS, where your death is probably going to be choking, and it can be torturous, right? If your death is going to be torturous and you want to avoid it, I think it's understandable. If it's inevitable, like as far as without killing yourself first, it's not our right to tell somebody they can't do that. But at the same time, we should do everything we can to ensure that somebody that's not in that situation isn't getting sucked into that system, or tempted into that system, or pushed into that system, or making the mistake of thinking that that's better for them than living, because it's not. And it'd be a terrible loss if we just started losing people who were depressed, or had chronic pain, or had any other chronic illness that is treatable and survivable, because a system now thinks that the people that run a system now think that they can save a few bucks or make a few bucks by cutting off someone's medical care and talking them into dying instead. That shouldn't be allowed to happen. It's very important that that doesn't happen. Next week, go ahead.
If the bill passes, that's what's going to happen.
And that's what I'm afraid of. And next week, we're going to look at an article about a case in which medical personnel offered assisted suicide to somebody who wasn't dying. Like, this is a very serious issue. Yep. It's a very serious issue. It's not something to take lightly. And so we're going to spend a few weeks on it, because there's a bunch of reading to do. And I think there's touches on a lot of other issues too. Medical ethics is a pretty complex, widespread topic. But go ahead, Richard.
With my chronic illness, it's worse in the summer because of the heat. Because I had heat exhaustion last week, and I passed out a little bit.
It's very dangerous. This is something that, a lot of people in our audience, a lot of the men in our audience have probably experienced this. You have to be really careful. I know everybody always says stay hydrated. Staying hydrated is part of how you protect yourself. But there is a level of getting overheated that can affect you even if you stay hydrated. Your body has to stay at a temperature that's close to its normal temperature. And if you can't cool off, you have the same problems that you have if you get a fever that is too high, the type of fever that would send you to the hospital. And go ahead.
And next week we're gonna have another heat wave as well.
Yep.
Yeah, and you guys don't have air conditioning over there, right?
No, especially in government-run places like the one I'm in now. We can't have our windows we can have windows open, but only at a certain angle, only,
can't have them open too far.
Yeah, basically.
Now, is that because it's an unsafe neighborhood, or is that because they think you'll go out the window?
They're out the window, but it's like health and safety.
I see. Yeah, and it can be dangerous.
and I can't bring my fan that I have at home, my fan unit, because it would be too much on too much electricity. Yeah.
Because you're rationed, your electricians are, or your electricity is rationed. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's, so Americans don't know what, maybe they know, but don't really know what it's like. We went over there, everybody that's been to ICMI 2016 and 2018, if you stayed in a place that didn't have air conditioning, we did one of those years, and I can't remember which one it was, but it was unforgivingly hot at that time for the UK, and it's difficult on somebody with any kind of health condition that makes you more susceptible to heat. Like any kind of health condition that makes you more susceptible to fatigue, or like if you have asthma, if you have diabetes, if you have any kind of like any illness that impacts on your organs, like, you know, in a negative way. You have heart problems, you know, anything like that. You get overheated, it's worse, and your symptoms are exacerbated.
And my chest has been hurting a lot lately as well.
And the heat will do that to you, but it is. And these are obviously things like a person in a care setting should talk to the healthcare providers that they're with because of that. But okay, so Mr. 303 is hearing music, but I don't. So and there's not any music playing on my computer, so I don't know where it's coming from. But that's Mr. 303 on Rumble. But what I would point out, I think it's a crime against humanity that people in the UK are not allowed to use fans or air conditioners or anything. Like, you could at least make a swamp cooler if you can use a fan. But
I got a hot water bottle, and I put some bottle of water in the freezer. So when that's frozen up tomorrow, I'm gonna put the frozen water in the hot water bottle.
Yep, that's a good plan.
We do have fans. We are allowed to use fans, and
yeah,
they can't tap into our electricity supply to make sure we're not using fans. Just like they can't tap into our electricity supply to make sure we're watching the BBC.
Well, that's
they like to tell us that they have the technology to decipher as to whether or not we're using fans or televisions. But
one difference, though, is Richard's in a setting where someone else controls what he can and can't do.
Yeah, we're living under a tyranny of bastards who will tell us that they have the technology to stop us from using fans or televisions.
Are they also going to backtrace all your connections and call the cyber police?
Yes.
You think
you're joking, Hannah. You think you're joking, but you're not.
Know. It's awful. The UK is like, it's supposed to be a first world nation. It was already starting to have. My parents were scared the last time I went there in 2018. They were like, "You can't go. There's all this bad stuff happening in the UK," you know. And I had to explain to them I was going to be with other people that I knew in a closed environment, and there was no danger. But boy, they were scared. My mom had a bad feeling. She didn't want me to go. And I almost got stuck there too.
But there was like, the Guardian did a hit piece on the ICMI 2018.
Yeah, they did.
And they said there were no black people at the conference.
Which is kind of strange, because weren't you there?
Yeah, I was there.
And are you a white dude?
No, but people think I'm white.
When they talk, yeah, people from maybe other areas Like everything that sounds like a British accent, any part of the UK, sounds white to them.
Basically.
But yeah. In any case, yeah, it's become a mess, a third world shithole in a lot of ways, and it's heartbreaking.
1984 was set in the UK, and so was V for Vendetta.
Well, and now we know why. Now we know why. So next week, yeah, Mr. 303 says, Richard, you're the blackest friend he has.
Ah, thank you.
But next week we're going to go over that article about the Canadian incident. There have been incidents like that in the U.S. There's not. I didn't find a lot of information about them. Just short little bits and pieces. But there are states in the U.S. that have assisted suicide, and so it's it can happen here as well.
Doesn't Oregon have assisted suicide as well?
Yep, I think Oregon's one, and there's a couple of
Washington Washington as well.
Yep. Then there's a couple of states that are farther to the east than the coast is. The West Coast is, and so it's not just two states. It's like 4 or 5. But if I understand right, I didn't find anything about it being in Ohio, where I am. But to me, this is like a virus that's spreading. Like they're not being careful to make sure that people won't be pressured into this or tricked into it or allowed to slide into it when they're really in need of help to live, not help to die. So, like I said, we'll go over that more next week, though. And in the meantime, I'm going to double check here because I think we did get more super chows. So let me back. Richard Bear gave us $5 and said, getting the flashback to 1930s Germany when families of disabled people were being told that their disabled relatives would be picked up and taken to care facilities. The Windows van, I think it's windowless van, would show up, pick up the disabled person, leave, and then some distance away from the family's home, the driver would activate a control that redirected the engine exhaust into the area where the disabled person was riding. This was also used for elderly family members who became infirm. They did all kinds of. There was not an intelligence test, but a cognitive ability test that they used to use, and if they could decide that you were senile, that was being senile was a death penalty offense. Prior to the discovery of the Holocaust, right? Having an intellectual disability that was beyond a certain level of confusion for that test. Same thing. Like everybody talks about one group of people that were killed during that time, but they started with the disabled. Yep. But they started with the disabled. They started specifically with people with intellectual disabilities and senility, like dementia, things like that.
Black people keep saying they were the original victims of that as well.
Well, it's possible. I don't know that there were very many in Germany at that time. But like anything's possible. I know that they did that. They did go after the gypsies. So, if they were going after people on the basis of race, and then they had a specific protected group, obviously everybody that wasn't in that group would have been a target. But thanks everybody for listening. Thanks you guys for going over this subject. I know it's really dark and it's a depressing subject. But thank you very much for going over it with me. I think this is a really big deal, and I think this is a huge threat to men. especially men with any type of disability.
And men of color.
Yep, and men of color. So, thanks and good night, guys.
Yeah. Men's rights activists are machines, dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have like a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.